Hey, everybody. Welcome to our next iLRN webinar on literacy and equity, a special track for iLRN 2024 coming up. Ken, do we have a title slide or something we might be able to put up? Or of course, how about the two of you introduce yourselves as well?
Sure, I do have a title slide, although I'm having a little bit of fickleness with PowerPoint interacting with Zoom on my machine. But good morning, everybody. I'm sorry, good day, everybody. I'm Ken Bigger. I am Director of Thought Leadership at the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy and a recently joined member of the iLRN Knowledge Tree Board. And I'm pleased to talk with you all about this special track today. So I will get into a little bit more of introductory remarks and apologia pro vita sua, if you will, in my section, but I'll turn it over to my colleague, Stephenie.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Stephenie Moore. I'm at the University of New Mexico, and I study online learning, ethics of technology, and I'm a former, just recently former fellow of the Barbara Bush Foundation, where Ken and I work together on some initiatives related to adult literacy and the use of technologies for adult literacy. I'm also editor-in-chief of the Journal of Computing and Higher Education, in case that becomes a useful venue for us to discuss. Yeah, as an outlet, right? So highly ranked to just toot our own horn. So we should, I'm more than happy to chat about leveraging that as a venue to help get some of the research out as well. So thanks for joining us to talk about what we feel is a really important initiative.
Yeah, wow. Thank you for joining us. Very cool. So, and for my part, I'm Jonathon Richter. I'm the CEO of the Immersive Learning Research Network, and here at the University of Montana in the Department of Teaching and Learning. Really happy to host this webinar with Stephenie and Ken as we were kind of gearing up to go live. One of the things I was just trying to express was how this really kind of lines up with iLRN's sort of strategic goals, to use the power of our professional association of immersive learning to focus on doing good for humanity in the world. I mean, that literally is our mission. And I really think that these aspects of literacy and equity, inclusion, accessibility are absolutely key, both in immersive experiences and for immersive experiences. So yeah, I'm really excited to get going. Yeah, thank you, Sarah, for joining us. This is really great. Yes, and we are definitely recording. This session's being recorded. It'll be put on our iLRN YouTube channel and disseminated profusely. So we want to make sure that those of you who are tuning in on YouTube, hi, welcome, and those who are participating live as well, please feel free to post questions and comments, links in the chat if you'd like, and we'll try to maybe have time at the end here for some Q&A. Ken, are you ready to go?
I am. I will move to the slide. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that we had the initial pieces covered for context, and I have worked out my presentation issues. So I'm going to share screen here for just a moment. Thank you all for joining us. I see some familiar names in the attendees list, so excited for that. And just give me a moment here. Thumbs up. Okay, yes. So we're here today to talk about the literacy, equity, and immersive learning special track at iLRN 2024, which will be in June. It'll be virtual in the first week of June and will be in Glasgow, Scotland in the second week of June. My hope today is to provide a little bit of introduction to myself and my role, what the Barbara Bush Foundation hopes to accomplish within the context of this partnership with iLRN and the conference, and then talk about both kind of big picture goals with regard to the kinds of conversations that we're looking to animate, as well as to provide some specific examples to give a little bit more of a hook, if you will, or a specific point of reference to the kinds of questions that we think might be helpful to pursue in this special track. Thank you, Jonathan, for the welcome to iLRN, and thank you for hosting this particular webinar. And I'm really pleased to be joined by my colleague Stephenie, who has been, in the recent past, the Barbara Bush Foundation Dollar General Research Fellow in Adult EdTech and Literacies. So a little bit of background about the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy. We are an organization as a whole that is very much focused on advancing intergenerational literacy strategies and programs. This has been part and core of the foundation's purpose from its founding by former First Lady Barbara Bush. We are also, in conjunction with that work, putting specific focus right now in helping to animate and convene a roundtable, if you will, of adult literacy partners at the nationwide level, an initiative called the Adult Literacy and Learning Impact Network, or All-In. And one of the points of this particular emphasis on the part of the foundation is recognizing that the huge influence that adult literacies building has on facilitating increased progress in literacy building as a whole. And but yet there are a number of different infrastructural challenges that face learning in this particular area that we want to be able to address effectively. Another piece of the puzzle that I work with and also have worked with Stephenie on are a variety of different ed tech initiatives that can speak specifically to this adult literacy piece. And so I've worked in my time with the foundation on trying to identify ed tech platforms and other strategies that may or not currently be sort of developed with adult learners in mind, but perhaps have some as yet undiscovered value that we can help activate because the market incentives are not always there. Then finally, again, I mentioned earlier on, I'm the Director of Thought Leadership, and I wanted to talk a little bit about what that means relative to this work here with iLRN. My focus as Director of Thought Leadership has a lot of emphasis on, I would say, literacy equity as opposed to literacy, or at least as distinct from literacy. And by that, I mean my focus is not primarily on activating, it's not primarily on theorizing about and building better educational strategies or teaching strategies per se, but about helping to activate the conditions for those strategies to reach more people and to open up avenues for people to be of all backgrounds to be able to pursue their educational goals. So when I say a literacy equity focus, I'm talking specifically about how is it that we lower barriers to access. I am placing less of an emphasis in my own particular work on achievement, although the foundation itself is doing a lot of thought leadership work and programmatic work in activating more effective achievement strategies. In this, I orient my work towards a goal that I call civic fluency. And when I'm done presenting, I'll pop a link into the chat that will help explain a little bit more about that. I recently published an article about this value of civic fluency and how it can, within the context of the article, which is for Library Quarterly, I talked about how civic fluency relates or can potentially relate to the library's role in facilitating literacy equity. Civic fluency, to put it as simply as I can, refers to the range of skills that make up what we envision is needed for a full human adult life lived in community. And I believe that it is a helpful orienting focus for this kind of work in literacy equity to be intentional, explicit, and articulate about the vision of both individual and community flourishing that we are seeking to foster, rather than merely uncritically stating our case on the basis of some situation to which we object. So the point about civic fluency is really to kind of focus in a very broad way about what it is that we think the future of literacy equity looks like, and how is it that we convene a conversation that draws everybody together in a diverse and inclusive way to bring that together. And that plays a role in the overall approach to this. So again, I will pop a link into the chat to the Library Quarterly article for anybody who is interested in understanding a little bit more about what I mean by that. Additionally, I will pop a link into the chat. I will be appearing on the Care Work podcast on the 31st of January, and I talk for about 30 minutes about literacy equity. And so if you're interested in a little bit more context about that work and our approach to it, in particular my approach to it, you can check those resources out. So apologies for the same shameless self-promotion there, but hoping that some insight there about this civic fluency paradigm, this kind of emancipatory justice focus of our literacy equity work will be illuminating for those of you who are looking to design discussions for this special track. And again, just this other thought leadership piece, I think, has been implicit in what I've been talking about before, that I'm really interested in addressing questions of access and opportunity. And when we talk through some of the specifics of the questions that are built into research areas that people might pursue within the special track, I think we'll be illustrating some of the ways that those things play out. Again, I think one of our goals, this is from the Barbara Bush Foundation's perspective, we are really interested in animating and activating scholarship, doing what we can to promote good, effective research in areas that are of particular concern to us. Again, particularly addressing the access issues in addition to achievement issues. And then I think also making sure that we are affirming a model of design that is embracing this sort of ethos of nothing about us without us, and seeking to animate, particularly because a lot of people in the adult learning space are otherwise socioeconomically disenfranchised. That we figure out ways to build in robust, ethical, justice-oriented engagement of those learners, and in as many phases of the design, implementation, revision process as we can when it comes to a variety of ed tech platforms and strategies, but certainly with regard to immersive learning. I'm going to, in a moment after I'm done kind of reviewing the goals for the special track and the big picture ideas, turn it over to Stephenie Moore to talk a little bit more about some of those research gaps that we're looking to fill. And then finally, just to say that, another big point of emphasis for us is advancing more equitable anthropogogical strategies. And anthropogogical is a little bit of a neologism. I did not invent the word. In the link to the special track, you'll see a citation that provides a little bit more explanation, but it is basically a way of trying to be inclusive of both adults or of adults within thinking about. So it's an alternative to saying pedagogical. Pardon me. So from the kind of big picture framework for this particular special track, I really see this special track as emphasizing the for good part of the Tech for Good theme of iLRN 2024. And by that, I just mean, I think, thinking critically, proactively, articulately about the good it is that we are pursuing and not just about the tech. I do hope that we can apply the civic fluency approach. Again, I didn't mention this earlier when I was describing it, but one of the things that civic fluency involves is thinking about literacies in the plural. You can look up the New London Group's work on multi-literacies as foundational for this particular area. That's cited in my journal article. But basically, the idea of looking at literacies in a broader, more inclusive realm than just reading and writing. And I don't think that's too hard to sell with regard to the group that's assembled around iLRN. I think everybody sort of gets that there are things such as digital literacies, there's critical media literacies, there are other things that we need to be thinking of, and to be aware that civic fluency is not just about any one particular cultural expression of leveraging a tool such as reading or writing. I know that we have a participant in the attendees list who is really active at sort of building a kind of functional literacy for adult learners or university level learners who are looking to move into a particular career field. And so curating immersive learning experiences that allow people to have kind of practical engagement with things that might arise in real time and space. And those are themselves kinds of literacies that we want to be thinking about. And then again, also with regard to the civic fluency approach, again, that's partly the nothing about us without us piece. That developing learning platforms that really prioritize learner engagement in all phases and build that into the design as well as the implementation. Other big questions I think that I'm particularly interested in, my background is in ethics and political theory, and I think that we are well served by thinking through very carefully the theory of the learner that's involved. In regard to some of these strategies, for instance, asking ourselves the question of, what follows if we believe that some level of freedom is constitutive of every element of human experience, and what influence does that have on decisions about deploying various behaviorist triggers, for instance, and how we go about designing immersive learning strategy. And that ties in very closely to this next item, which is thinking in a careful, articulate way about how immersive learning platforms are stewards of attention, about what it is that people elect to focus on, and how is it that we think through the variety of implications there. And then, again, this last piece, again, I've touched on a few times, ethical practices in design. And I think my colleague Stephenie is in a position to talk pretty well about those things as well, and has. And just to highlight, I know that many of us are familiar with these issues around educational inequities as they apply within traditional kinds of forms of K through 12 learning. They are readily apparent and available, and take on different dimensions in the adult learning context, often because learning for adults is not as centralized or as top-down as a lot of educational engagements that take place for folks in the K through 12 space. So those are sort of the kind of higher level abstract order questions. I wanted to kind of take a little bit of time to go through some of the specific examples of questions that people might pursue within this special track, and just provide some illustrations. And these are really meant just to be sort of illustrative and suggestions, nothing that is necessarily specific. But we listed about 6 different areas, one of which is about how is it that we counteract technology's capacity to exacerbate inequality. And if you look on the call for papers, I use a quote from an Oxford philosopher that talks specifically about how technology can and usually does play a role within our current economic models in exacerbating inequality. And so the question that I'm interested in asking is that necessarily true? And are there ways that we can adjust our strategies within immersive learning? So for instance, one of the things that customizable learning pathways do is they allow for rapid progress relative to people's learners' specific goals. However, I think we need to pay attention to the way in which that kind of strategy and customizable learning pathways tends to capitalize on pre-existing background knowledge, and think through and research what differences the stage of learning makes, whether or not somebody's a kid or an adult, and how those things play out. Second item, incorporating multiple literacies. Again, building in learning experiences into immersive learning environments that are kind of broadly oriented, not just to inculcating facility with reading and writing as particular kinds of technologies that allow us to exercise cultural agency, but begin to think about immersive learning experiences from the perspective of things that can drive, again, greater ability to acquire that kind of civic fluency. Ethics of design, again, I've touched on this a few points along the way. This idea, this ethos of nothing about us without us, particularly in the ed tech field, particularly in a situation in which people who are living with low literacy and are adults are oftentimes very far away. So how do we do something along the lines of what Brian Stevenson of the Equal Justice Initiative talks about in terms of being proximate to the people facing these challenges? And how do we start to build some of those practices into the development of technology? Last slide for me here, just to go through 3 more questions. Resource deployment in virtual learning. How is it that we think carefully about the level of financial and technological investment that's required in the development of these things, and weigh those considerations against the ability to reach more learners or to reach learners in other spaces? Again, this winds up being an ethical question much more than a sort of educational strategy or technological question. But I do think as we are thinking about tech for good, it's an opportunity for us to think these through. Fifthly, civic fluency and human agency. How is it that we understand the ethics of binge learning or behaviorist models with regard to designing immersive learning platforms? What cost do those things come at? I think there are a variety of different illustrations that we can look to. But again, if we are thinking that there is some ethical or moral relevance to respecting autonomy generally on the part of the individual, what sort of changes does that entail for how we go about approaching the designing of learning platforms in this kind of way? And then finally, the last illustration, again, I've touched on this. What sort of anthropogogical pivots do we make when we begin to change our assumptions about the context in which immersive learning takes place? Again, particularly with regard to how adult learning environments might differ from K through 12 learning environments. So that is, for me, what I think is both at a sort of a high level, the background of why it is that we wanted to the Barbara Bush Foundation wanted to engage in this partnership and animate this special track for iLRN, what the big picture issues are as we see them, and then finally just some concrete illustrations that I hope provide a little bit more tangibility to some of those questions. I believe this list is far from exhaustive. I look forward to learning more about them. I will now turn things over to my colleague Stephenie. As I promised, I will pop some links into the chat, and will be available to answer questions after we hear from Stephenie. So thank you all very much.
Yeah, I just to follow on everything that Ken has been saying, we did a study as part of my fellowship at the foundation to look at the state of the research in the field, and I'm
Stephenie, you just muted for some reason. Sorry.
Oh, because I hit the space bar. Thanks, Zoom. Anyway, I dropped the link over in the chat to the research article that we just published that really talks about the state of the research around the use of learning technologies for adult literacy. And the shorthand for that is, or the very short summary for that is that we have a substantial gap, which means a substantial need, which also means a substantial opportunity to start filling that space. So we look specifically at the use of learning technologies for reading as a literacy with adult populations. So we did not expand this to include digital literacy or anything like that. And I really want to put a fine point on the scope of the need here, which we discuss in that article as well. I don't know how many folks who have joined us today are aware of the statistics, but in the US alone, 52% of the adult population reads at level 2 or below on the PIAC. And to help you understand what level 2 means, somebody who is reading at a level 3 is able to read information across multiple sources and make sense of what they're reading. So this might be like reading multiple news stories or something like that, that may be reporting on something very differently or reporting different statistics or things like that. And they can interpret and make sense across multiple pieces. Somebody reading at a level 2 can functionally read, but they have trouble making meaning across 2 or more sources of information. So I think you start to see how even in the PAC definition, we start to run headlong into information literacy, data literacy, you know, all of these things start to become embedded as part of that. So of that, well, no, I shouldn't say it that way. 38% read at a level 1 or below. And this means they're having a hard time actually reading the information in a single source. It may be something as basic as they need to be developing vocabulary. Maybe they are ESL learners who are still coming up to speed with English language in the US. Yeah, Sarah, it's a daunting statistic. And as somebody who's worked in education and designing learning technologies and solutions for over 20 years now, I just can't think of another problem of this scope and scale. And so to pair that with such a dearth of research and attention in this area, I feel like it just evokes a sense of responsibility of those of us who are designers and developers, as well as researchers in the field, to really pick this up as something that's more of a grand challenge. So I love what Ken has really envisioned here for this track. I think that it's more than just an iLRN track. And Jonathon, I really appreciate the iLRN team picking this up with us. I think that this is an opportunity for us to embrace this as a grand global challenge. I mean, I'm spouting US statistics, but the global statistics aren't any better. In some cases, they're worse. So I think that this is a grand global challenge that cascades into a whole range of these other multiple literacies that Ken has been talking about. And therefore, it cascades into health implications, economic implications, employment, you know, workforce. It has all kinds of implications. So from my perspective, this is a great banner for our entire discipline to really be picking up and saying, we need to move the ball down the field. Sorry, I'm from Oklahoma, so everything's football metaphors. But we need to move the ball down the field on this, and we just simply have not been doing that. In our review of the research, we found a total of 21 research articles over the past 10 years. And that's being sort of generous in what we decided to consider research as well. So we have a, like I said, we have a big gap. We have a big need, but this also presents a fantastic opportunity for us to try and devise solutions, test solutions, share that knowledge with each other, and support adult learning programs or adult education programs in particular that often are frankly very under-resourced. The difference between funding and research for K-12 literacy and use of various interventions for K-12 is vast as well. So when we focus on adult learners, we have very high need, very limited attention, very limited resources. So I hope that fires you up to helping us throw some dirt into this meteor-sized gaping hole that we really do need to address. And with that, I think I'll turn this over to questions from folks and how can we help support you in what it is that you're thinking about proposing or the work that you're doing.
Wow, that was fantastic. Thank you so much, Stephenie. Yeah, just so many different issues. The need is absolutely dire. I like the way you frame this as kind of a global challenge and really maybe, you know, sort of the common element in terms of so many of the other challenges and problems that are happening, not just in the United States, but everywhere around the world. This is really, really fantastic. Sarah, I think, had a question, as well as some amazing resources. Thank you, Sarah Barker, for submitting the various links there. I don't see that. question.
Yeah, so the question that I see from Sarah is, as I continue to do research, I find more and more research suggesting that tech advances are increasing the digital divide. How do we convince administrators at our high school and universities to invest in immersive tech for all students in the classroom? Yeah, so that rhetorical piece of convincing administrators, I think, is one that I'm going to have to stew on for a little bit, because there are some particular circumstances there. But you're absolutely right. I mean, I think one of the things that I try to do in terms of talking about literacies building more broadly is kind of draw attention to the fact that, you know, reading and writing as practices are inventions, and they're relatively recent ones at that. And so what literacies constituted as, you know, at the most abstract level, you know, ways to know things, say things, and do things using cultural tools and symbols, we've only been using reading and writing for about less than 2% of human time on the planet. You know, if you imagine we appeared on the planet 24 hours ago, it's been for less than the last half hour. And I do that not so primarily just to draw attention to this issue that reading and writing are inventions. They are not natural faculties, that they are skills that people are acquiring, and that there is a much broader array of literacies for us to be taking a look at. And I don't know, you know, that there really is a lot of evidence to suggest that we've ever lived in a substantively more literate age than we do now, at least with regard to reading and writing. Certainly, there have been shortfalls and declines with regard to test-based performances. But I think the main issue is the one that Sarah lifts up there, is that the goalposts are moving. Again, moving back to sort of the Oklahoma football speak here that Stephenie introduced, but that the levels of literacies needed to participate in that kind of community, that beloved community of literacy, if you will, or that community that's constituted by civic fluency, has changed dramatically. And I think thinking that part through is one of the things that we're looking to do. Is like, okay, we need to be figuring out how to leverage the technology effectively and equitably in order to help us make more rapid gains. There was a study about 8 years ago or so from the Business Roundtable. It was a group of CEOs that were identifying the importance of needing to invest in early childhood literacy, because this group of business leaders of large corporations had already identified a pretty significant talent shortfall in their pipeline of the levels of literacies needed in order to participate in the business universe had grown, and that they were not finding people. One point of reference for this, and this might be something that would be particularly important for convincing administrators, is that 92% of jobs currently require some sort of digital facility. And so if we think about reading and writing, for instance, as gateway literacies that provide an opening door to accessing other forms of literacies in ways that, you know, other literacies can't reciprocate, you know, pointing that part of it out, I think is hugely important. And I will say, I was, you know, joking with my colleagues at the Barbara Bush Foundation yesterday, not to name names, because I think this happens across organizations, where sometimes we're just mystified about how exactly the tools we use to communicate with each other are actually working, or something comes up and we just can't figure it out, right? And use those moments to kind of understand that, you know, what is somebody who is otherwise socioeconomically disenfranchised, who may be facing much larger barriers to access to learning. They're moving into these same digital environments. You know, I'm under no illusions, like I'm hyper educated and I struggle, right? And I try to maintain touch with that. And so thinking through from a design perspective, how is it that we begin to come up with ways that we communicate, you know, that we're lowering the stakes, that the level of threat, dignitary and otherwise, is lower in these environments, and that we're creating welcome and inclusive environments for diverse communities of learners, I think is really, really helpful. So a long answer to a short question.
If I could jump in and just circle back to working with administrators, Sarah. So I've worked for over 20 years on implementing technologies in higher ed in particular, and in a few other contexts. And I think this is always a very difficult question, unfortunately, especially since the pandemic when online learning was rolled out at a mass scale. And of course, what that did was really exacerbate inequities in a lot of situations rather than bridge barriers or divides. And so I think some of this is a little bit incumbent upon us as professionals, both in terms of it's a complex mix, right, between the research that we do and the models that we generate, and that we do a better job of communicating that and sharing that in more public or accessible formats with policymakers and decision makers. And one thing that became really painfully evident, we did sort of an analysis of this, was that I've got a piece called "The Design Models We Have Are Not the Design Models We Need." And it's talking about this, that our instructional design and ed tech development and various models that we have, doesn't matter if you're using, TPAC or, whatever, none of them include any attention to any of the issues that we have been talking about today. We don't raise issues around how do you understand your learners from an equity or diversity or access sort of perspective. How do you fold that information? Well, let me back up. How do you use front-end analysis to better understand the issues so that you can fold all of that into either, instructional design or technology selection or, implementation decisions or any of that. We just simply, as a profession, and I'm using profession very broadly here, we have not baked any of that into our own models. And of course, if our models are scaffolds or representations of the work that we do, what that means is that we're just not including all of this. And Bill McDonough is a designer in sustainability. He has a wonderful book called Cradle to Cradle Design. And he was giving a talk on design and how we usually think of design as this extremely optimistic act, right? That we're taking where we are in the moment and trying to move us forward to something that's new. And he said, when I look around at a lot of designs, what I really see is tragic design. Things are happening as a result of the designs because we just simply didn't design for them to be any differently. They're just sort of de facto results or impacts of that. And so I think there's a challenge to us too, not just to the administrator, which, believe me, I've dealt with plenty of frustrating provosts or deans or whatever on the matter. But I think this is also incumbent upon us as a professional field to say, how do we develop models that actually bake these in such a way that we can scaffold those who are in decision making or policy making roles, who they're not going to have the same research or whatever background that we have, but they are still in those roles and they're going to be making those decisions. And so how do we support them? So I would be every bit as interested in both research that focuses on designing effective, impactful learning experiences, interfaces, things like that, as well as around this question that you're asking of how do we support the more systemic pieces of this that really come down to policies that people shape and adopt, decision makers, and who, frankly, they're relying on people to advise them on this. We've kind of been talking in a very insular way in our research. We're not doing a great job really getting out a whole lot of public scholarship. So I think those are pieces that could really start to help, first of all, reimagine our models, our conceptual models around all of this, and then communicate those models back out to decision makers and policymakers so that we can support them in that work that they do.
I've been so grateful in learning from Stephenie in this area, and I think I do commend the paper that she put into the linked in the chat that surveys the sort of the landscape of adult ed tech research. And I think there are a number of different findings that she highlights there, but this issue of that, one of them that she identifies, that it's the design, not the technology, that we need to be taking a look at. And I think that is in many respects, the opportunity that we're really looking to animate with this particular special track, right, is to think really intentionally about the design and how that quote unquote for good piece winds up influencing it and pushes back against what we might just see as abundant sets of opportunities that the tech itself can provide, but the tech is not going to be a useful deployment of anybody's time or resources if we're not really intentional about addressing the design issues, particularly when we're trying to address these kinds of injustices when it comes to educational opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Ken and I talked a lot about, of course, the research on no significant difference and how do we pivot away from, is this technology useful or is it better than blah, 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 to really saying, how do we unpack the design features, the strategies that are being employed, what's really present in a given design. I mean, you all probably know as well as I do, you could take an online class that is, take an online class, it could be very well designed, it could be very poorly designed. That doesn't really have anything to do with the technology itself, right? And so same thing, of course, with immersive learning environments. And Jonathon, I would love to actually hear from you, like, how does iLRN define immersive learning environments? Because I even wonder if maybe I have a rather narrow definition of what this might be. But I wonder if it might help some folks to even be thinking about what does that mean when we talk about the environments that we're building.
Oh yeah, that is a good, and it's we've had so many discussions around that, and
bet.
it's a moving target in some respects. Different researchers and designers and educators kind of look at that idea of immersive from a different angle, but it's largely we've kind of thinking of immersion sort of, I think, first as a psychological construct. So you're immersed in a good novel, or you're immersed in, like the Csikszentmihalyi's work on flow. You're absolutely in, your attention is focused on a particular thing. Or you can look at it from sort of the technological or the technical sort of stimulus perspective too. Because by de facto, if you are surrounded by the digital and you are in a digital space like virtual reality, your attention tends to be in that space. So from the virtual reality perspective, immersive can be just a technical trick of creating that psychological immersion by being in an environment. So there's a narrative aspect to it as well. So you can be involved in a good book or a particular perspective. And I think a social dimension, right? So you could be in a conversation with, one or more people, and that social interaction itself creates that psychological perspective of being in a conversation, and immersion comes from that. Our knowledge tree group has sort of an evolving framework with those kind of three different dimensions of immersion. So some people are very much going from the stimulus, some people are really much going from the narrative, and other people from kind of the social perspective. I think those are the three current ones. But yeah, different people have come up with different frameworks and different typologies for examining it. And the word is out. There's not a lot of convergence and agreement on what immersion is, but that's
That's sort of lovely, because that's like having a really nice playground of ideas.
Yeah, right? Yeah, and we do get a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different expertise, and different sort of takes in the design of what is an immersive experience. And we're really open to, at the Immersive Learning Research Network, we have tended towards a lot of technological or technical ways of doing immersion. But we're absolutely open to and have been talking about all kinds of different things. During this conversation, I was thinking about communities as an immersive space, and thinking about the sort of infrastructure that we have or opportunities that we have for the public to immerse. Because, you know, here at our local library, we've been voted the world's best library, public library, several years in a row. And we're really proud of that. But they have like VR experiences where people can go and sign up and experience it. We also have amazing opportunities at our local museums, the Discovery Center, and there's VR experiences there. But in terms of like providing equity and literacy opportunities for people, was thinking like there must be community infrastructures in some places more than others where the general public can find out about these things. One of my research areas has been technology adoption, like specifically for teachers, but how do they learn to become aware of and then adopt a particular kind of technology that's useful for teaching and learning? And if you're not aware of it, if you're sort of standing askance of like artificial intelligence and you're not actively playing with it, there's all these chimerical, you know, you have all these metaphors and impressions that don't match with reality a lot of times. So we'd love to create those playgrounds where the public can access and have opportunities with I mean, that the other issue of that is like immersive learning. Even if we're just looking at from the technical sort of aspect, the playground is huge, and there are so many new types of immersion, haptic interface, smell-o-vision is on its
right.
you know, all these different ways of engaging. Like, how does the public infrastructure invest in some of these things and create some of these payouts? There's so many different things. Just wonder what you thought about those.
But sorry, Stephenie and Jonathan, I think your conversation here particularly, you know, points to the way like immersion, and this question of immersion, like just pushes back to a focus about how the curation and stewardship of attention is a foundational educational question and simultaneously a foundational ethical question. And you know, Sarah noted in her comments that she's working on this distinction or the issues around gamification versus game-based learning. And I think that also winds up attaching to this very issue about the curation of attention, right? The distinction between game-based learning and gamification being about, to a certain extent, who's establishing the goals for learning and how do those get activated within the design? Is it open-ended? Is it sort of infused with a kind of emancipatory ethos, if you will, that recognizes the autonomy of the learner? Or is it trying to leverage, you know, a certain model that where we might think about, you'll see there's a TED Talk out there about Duolingo where the TED people put a gloss on it about how to make learning addictive, right? And to his credit, the speaker doesn't actually use that framework, because I do struggle at some point to understand in what context addiction is a positive metaphor, and like, why is it that we want to cultivate it, right? So I think these things pop up quite often, and I think they're particularly acute in a situation in which you're dealing with really, again, U.S. context or more broadly in a global context, right? Systems of socioeconomic stratification where the agency of the learner might be suppressed by whatever sort of systemic condition. And so thinking really intentionally about how we design these tools as a way to kind of ameliorate that or counteract it rather than reinforce it or recapitulate it, I think is really is the heart of this particular special track from my perspective.
Mm-hmm. That's good points. Sarah, did you want to speak? I'm not sure how to actually hand over that mic. Michael, is there
Nope, she's declining.
Oh, okay. No, good stuff there. Yeah, so how might we reach out to, you know, scholars and people at libraries and museums and communities, you know, other people out there? I think it was Stephenie that had mentioned that there was not a dearth, but not quite enough scholarship in this area. How can
Oh,
we?
I would say a dearth.
There is a dearth. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there must be people out there doing things, how can we attract
I
um
think the challenge we have right now is that we sort of have it's a siloed approach, like right, like this is so common in academia, but we have a literacy research community that actually tends to be pretty tech adverse. And then we've got an ed tech community that just has not latched on to literacy in particular as a need. And in some ways, I even worry about instructional designers often designing way above actual literacy rates. Like I think this is an area where we don't understand the need and we don't understand our learners. So that's some of what Ken and I have been talking about is how can we start bringing a very interdisciplinary approach together. And Jonathon, I just look, I'm going to leave today having learned a lot from you. So I
likewise. I
love
mean,
the
yeah,
whole
this is
idea of
great.
communities as immersive space. And so I wonder if we start trying to figure out how do we create part of this space. Like, I used to work in engineering.
Mhm.
In engineering, they really did adopt grand challenges where they were like, look, we need to work on sustainability. We need to work on energy solutions. We need to work on X and Y. As a field or set of fields, we've not really adopted grand challenges per se, but I'm kind of on the cusp of feeling like this is one that maybe we start to posit, right, as a grand challenge where we bring interdisciplinary researchers and practitioners together. And how do we build that community as an immersive space? I'm like, this is going to stick with me for the rest of my career, Jonathon.
Yay, good.
And how do we start to build that together? So hopefully what we have coming together at iLRN and folks like Sarah and others who I'm really hoping you guys are going to be presenting and bringing some stuff, that we start creating that space and hopefully start looping more people into this to just tackle this problem space, because there's so many different aspects of this, right?
Yeah.
But that's my thoughts, is that if we can start building something where we're really bringing folks across disciplines together, and I finding folks who aren't tech averse is probably a good place to start from a change theory perspective.
Sure.
You usually want to start with your opinion leaders
Right.
who are going to be more open to change. And
Yeah.
so maybe there's some folks who we could identify who we could loop in as part of the process and start seeing what can we build here as part of a community.
Right. Well, I would, we've got currently 10 sort of branches of our knowledge tree. And those are, the trunk of the tree is sort of the foundations of immersive learning. But we've got these, that's the computer science, the game design, and the learning sciences. You got to have those three things to have a high quality immersive learning. But then there's branches of medical education and healthcare, nature and environmental sciences, workforce and industry. And I can really see literacy and equity becoming a strong branch, meaning a continued sort of special interest group with a focus on the mission and sort of outcomes that we're talking about here, creating that community within it. And in that way, I could perhaps iLRN can contribute to the larger thing. I would love to do that. We've embraced the 17 United Nations Sustainability Development Goals as we definitely want to support those. Our Tech for Good mission this year, our Tech for Good theme for this year, we want to keep developing our community so that we're not only developing this professional association of immersive learning experts, but we're all working together to improve humanity and our world. That's literally our mission. So
that's refreshing.
Well, it's kind of the time, it's like this, we really need to do this. So we would love to collaborate with you, with Sarah Barker, other people joining the call. And if you're listening on YouTube, please consider taking a look at the special track on literacy and equity in immersive environments, and presenting your work online at whatever stage. We take works in progress, we take academic work, we take teacher, designer, and other types of works. We even have a student game jam going on right now, and those are all anchored on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So lots of different ways you can participate, and I'm really excited about this conversation. Thank you so much for coming in. And I apologize, I had to sort of take Dennis Beck spot. He's not feeling too well. Sorry about that, Dennis. I hope I represented the knowledge tree okay. Yeah, is there any other kind of final statements or questions that anybody has?
I think I would just offer to folks, if you have questions as you're developing and put it together, I mean, absolutely feel free to reach out to Ken or me, and or both of us, Simon or Dennis. I know Dennis isn't on it either today, but clearly I think you can gather we're very passionate about this, very committed to this, and we're very happy to help support your work in whatever way we can.
Yeah. Well,
Absolutely.
again, thank you all.
Yep, thank you. Thanks to those who've joined us, and anybody, please do reach out if you have further questions.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I guess that concludes our webinar. We've got a number coming up here in the near future. We'll be announcing those shortly. I think, what is it? The 25th, we have our Robert Burns night on climate change with our partners at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. So join us then, and we'll see you all online, in world, and hopefully face to face sometime soon.